I never imagined that a stranger's funeral would be the day my life truly began. It was a Thursday in October, the kind of cold gray morning where the sky sits so low you feel like you could reach up and touch it. I was standing in a cemetery in Asheville, North Carolina, watching a casket being lowered into the ground for a woman I had never met. Her name was Diane Holloway. She was 41 years old. She had lived 3 houses down from me for almost 2 years, and I didn't even know her last name until the day she died. I should back up. My name is Sophie. I was 27 that fall, working double shifts as a veterinary technician at a small animal clinic on the east side of town. I lived alone in a rental cottage with a leaky faucet and a porch that creaked every time the wind blew. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't building anything either. My days blurred together. Wake up, coffee, scrubs, needles, barking dogs, drive home, microwave dinner, sleep. I had friends. Sure. But most of them had moved on to marriages and mortgages while I was still figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. Diane was quiet. I'd see her sometimes in the evening walking to her mailbox or sitting on her front steps with a mug in her hands, staring at nothing. She had dark circles under her eyes and a softness to her that made her seem like she was always about to apologize for something. We waved at each other once or twice. That was the extent of it. I didn't know she was sick. I didn't know she had a son. The first time I saw him was the morning the ambulance came. I heard the sirens around 6 a.m. and stepped out onto my porch in a hoodie and bare feet. 2 paramedics were carrying a stretcher out of her house, and standing on the lawn in pajama pants and a wrinkled Spider-Man shirt was a boy. He looked about 5, maybe 6. His hair was messy, his feet were bare on the wet grass, and he was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, watching the whole thing with a stillness that no child should know how to hold. I walked over without thinking. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have shoes on. "Hey," I said, crouching down. "My name's Sophie. I live right over there. Are you okay?" He looked at me. His eyes were brown, enormous, and completely dry. "My mom told me to stay inside," he said. I nodded. "Do you want to come sit on my porch? It's warmer there." He didn't answer, he just followed me, the rabbit dragging on the ground behind him. His name was Oliver. He was 6 years old, and within 48 hours, I learned that his mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months earlier. She had no family. No siblings, no parents still living, no emergency contact on any form at the hospital except a disconnected phone number that might have once belonged to an ex-boyfriend. Oliver's father was listed as unknown on his birth certificate. Diane had been doing it all alone, quietly, invisibly, in a rented house, 3 doors down from mine. She died on a Friday. I found out from a police officer who knocked on my door that afternoon. He said Oliver was being held temporarily at the county's child services office and asked if I knew anything about the family. I told him I barely knew her. He nodded, wrote something on a clipboard, and left. I sat on my couch for 2 hours after that. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't eat. I just kept seeing that boy on the lawn, barefoot, holding his rabbit, watching his mother get carried away. And I kept thinking, he's alone now, completely alone. I called the social services office the next morning. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I'd just ask how he was doing, make sure someone was looking after him, and go back to my life. But the woman on the phone sounded tired, overworked, and when she told me that Oliver was currently in an emergency foster placement and would likely be moved again within the week, something cracked open inside me. I asked what it would take to become his foster parent. There was a long pause. She explained the process, the home study, the background checks, the training hours, and I wrote it all down on the back of a grocery receipt with a pen that kept dying. She warned me it could take weeks, sometimes months. She asked me if I had any experience with children. I told her I had a 15-pound terrier named Biscuit who refused to be house-trained. She didn't laugh. I hung up, looked around my tiny cottage, and thought, what am I doing? But I didn't stop. The next 3 weeks were a blur. I filled out forms I barely understood. I cleaned my house until it smelled like bleach and artificial lemon. I took a CPR class on a Saturday. I asked my landlord if I could childproof the kitchen cabinets. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but said yes. During that time, I visited Oliver twice at his temporary placement. The first time, he wouldn't look at me. He sat on a plastic chair in a fluorescent-lit room and held his rabbit and said nothing. The foster mother, a heavy-set woman with kind hands, told me he hadn't spoken much since arriving. He ate when food was placed in front of him. He slept when the lights went off. But he didn't play. He didn't ask for anything. He just existed. The second visit was different. I brought a coloring book and a small box of crayons. I set them on the table between us and didn't say a word. After about 10 minutes, he reached for the blue crayon. He drew a house. It had one window and no door. I watched him color in the sky, pressing hard, filling the entire top of the page with thick blue strokes. "That's a nice house," I said. "It doesn't have a door," he said, not looking up. "So nobody can leave." My throat closed. I blinked fast and nodded. "That makes sense," I whispered. He kept coloring. After a while, he said, very quietly, "Are you going to take me home?" I looked at him. I thought about my one-bedroom cottage, my 60-hour work weeks, my empty savings account, and my complete lack of qualification for any of this, and I said, "Yes, I'm going to try." He didn't smile. But he slid the coloring book toward me and handed me the green crayon. We sat there drawing together until the hour was up, and when I left, he stood at the window and watched me walk to my car. I waved. He lifted one hand, barely, and let it fall. That night, I cried in the shower for 20 minutes and then made a list of everything I needed to buy. The approval came 5 weeks later. I don't think I've ever been so terrified holding a piece of paper. Oliver arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with a single backpack and his rabbit, whose name, I learned, was Captain. The foster mother hugged him at the door and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, walked inside, and stood in the middle of my living room, turning in a slow circle. "Where's my room?" he asked. I led him to the small den I'd converted. I'd painted the walls pale blue, hung a set of curtains with tiny stars on them, and placed a small wooden bed frame against the wall. The sheets had rocket ships on them because the woman at the store said boys liked space. I had no idea if Oliver liked space. I had no idea what Oliver liked at all. He walked to the bed, sat down, placed Captain on the pillow, and looked at me. "Can I keep the door open at night?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Whatever you need." He nodded. Then he lay down, fully clothed, shoes still on, and closed his eyes. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. I stood in the hallway and listened to him breathe and realized I had no idea what I was doing. Not a single clue. But I also knew, with a certainty I can't explain, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first few months were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not dramatic, not explosive, just relentlessly, quietly hard. Oliver was polite. He said please and thank you. He ate what I cooked without complaint, even when I burned the rice or forgot to thaw the chicken. He brushed his teeth when I told him to and put his shoes by the door in a perfect line every night. He was so well behaved, it broke my heart because I knew it wasn't natural. It was armor. He had learned very young that if he was easy, if he didn't take up too much space, maybe the world would let him stay. He didn't talk about his mother. Not once. I didn't push it. I kept a photo of Diane that I'd found in a box the landlord let me collect from her old house. A small, faded picture of her holding Oliver as a baby, both of them squinting in the sun. I put it in a frame on his nightstand. He never mentioned it, but I noticed he turned it face down some nights and face up on others. I let him decide. Biscuit helped more than I expected. The little terrier was suspicious at first, circling Oliver like he was an intruder, sniffing his shoes, growling at Captain the Rabbit. But within a week, Biscuit was sleeping at the foot of Oliver's bed every night. One morning, I found them on the floor together, Oliver's arm draped over the dog, both of them still asleep at 7:15 when I came to wake him for school. I stood there watching, and something in my chest loosened for the first time in weeks. School was complicated. Oliver was smart, clearly, but he didn't participate. His teacher called me in after the second week. She said he sat in the back row, completed every assignment perfectly, and never raised his hand. He didn't cause trouble, he didn't interact. At recess, he sat on a bench near the fence and drew in a small notebook. She asked me if everything was okay at home. I told her the truth, that he had lost his mother recently and was adjusting. She looked at me with an expression I'd come to recognize. Part sympathy, part doubt. "Are you a relative?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm his foster mother." She wrote something down. I left feeling like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. But I kept showing up. That was all I knew how to do. I packed his lunch every morning: turkey and cheese, apple slices, a juice box, and a note. The notes were stupid at first. "Have a great day." "You're awesome." But after a while, I started drawing little animals on them, stick-figure dogs and lopsided cats, because I remembered how he'd reached for the crayons that first day. I wasn't an artist. The drawings were terrible. But one afternoon, I found 3 of the notes folded carefully inside his backpack, smooth, flat, kept. That was when I knew he was listening, even when he wasn't talking. The months turned into a year. Then 2. I formally adopted Oliver when he was 8. The court hearing was brief, procedural, almost anticlimactic. The judge asked me a few questions, reviewed the paperwork, and signed the order. Oliver sat beside me in a button-down shirt that was slightly too big, holding Captain in his lap. When it was over, I looked at him and said, "It's official, kid. You're stuck with me." He looked up, and for the first time since I'd known him, he grinned. A real, full, little kid grin that crinkled his eyes and showed the gap where he'd lost a front tooth the week before. "Can we get pizza?" he asked. We got pizza. We ate the entire thing in the car in the parking lot, with Biscuit stealing pepperoni off my slice, and Oliver laughed, actually laughed, a sound so bright and unexpected that I almost choked on my food. That night, when I tucked him in, he said, "Good night, Mom." He said it like it was nothing, like it was the most natural word in the world. And maybe for him, by then, it was. I pressed my lips together hard, kissed his forehead, and made it to the hallway before the tears came. I leaned against the wall and let them fall, not from sadness, but from something so overwhelming I still don't have a name for it. The years that followed weren't a movie. There was no soundtrack, no montage, no moment where everything clicked into place with a swell of music. It was ordinary. Beautifully, painfully ordinary. Homework at the kitchen table. Arguments about screen time. A broken window from a baseball that went sideways. Parent-teacher conferences where I sat in plastic chairs designed for people half my size and pretended I knew what I was doing. Oliver grew. Not just physically, though that happened fast enough. By 10 he was up to my shoulder. By 12 he was borrowing my jackets. But he grew in other ways, too. He started talking more. He told me about a kid named Marcus at school who shared his lunch when Oliver forgot his. He told me about a book he was reading where a boy builds a boat and sails across the Atlantic. He asked me why the moon looked different every night, and I had to Google the answer on my phone under the dinner table so I wouldn't look stupid. He still drew. Every day, in notebooks, on napkins, on the margins of his math worksheets. His teacher once sent home a note that said Oliver is very talented, but please ask him to stop illustrating his word problems. I framed the note. But there were hard seasons too. When Oliver was 11, a boy at school told him that his real mom was dead and that I was just a babysitter who felt sorry for him. Oliver came home that day and didn't speak for 3 days. He wouldn't eat dinner. He wouldn't look at me. He sat on his bed with Captain, who was threadbare and faded by now, and stared at the wall. On the 3rd night, I sat on the floor outside his door and said, "You don't have to talk. But I want you to know that I didn't choose you out of pity. I chose you because that morning when I saw you standing on the grass, I recognized something. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was bravery. But whatever it was, it called to me, and I answered. And I would answer again, every single time. Silence. Then the sound of his door opening. He came out, sat beside me in the hallway, and leaned his head against my shoulder. We stayed there for a long time, not talking, just breathing. He never brought it up again. But the next morning, the photo of Diane was face up on his nightstand, and it stayed that way from then on. I made sacrifices I never talked about. I stopped going out with friends because babysitters cost money I didn't have. I gave up the idea of going back to school for my veterinary degree because the tuition would have meant less for Oliver. I wore the same 3 pairs of work shoes until the soles went thin, resoled them, wore them again. I skipped meals sometimes, not because I wanted to, but because growing boys eat more than you'd think, and groceries aren't free. None of this felt like sacrifice at the time. It felt like the obvious thing to do. You have a kid, you make it work. You figure it out. But looking back, I can see how much of myself I folded up and put away, not forever, just for now, I told myself. Just until he's settled. Just until things are easier. Things never really got easier, they just got different. Oliver turned 14 and discovered he wanted to be an architect. It started with a library book about Frank Lloyd Wright that he checked out 7 times in a row until the librarian finally just gave it to him. He started building models out of cardboard and hot glue, tiny structures with angled roofs and paper windows. He'd spend hours on them, measuring with a ruler, adjusting angles, muttering to himself about load-bearing walls like a miniature engineer. His bedroom looked like a construction site. That's when he started asking about Diane. Not all at once. It came in fragments, dropped casually into conversations like loose change. Did my mom like buildings? Was she good at drawing? Did she ever talk about me? The last question gutted me. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I'd never known Diane. I couldn't tell him what she thought about or dreamed of or whispered to him at night when he was small. All I had was that one photograph and the vague outline of a woman who had done everything she could with the time she was given. I told him what I could. I told him she was quiet and gentle. I told him she kept a clean house and a neat yard. I told him that the day she went to the hospital, she told him to stay inside, which meant her last conscious thought was about keeping him safe. He listened. He nodded. And then he said something I didn't expect. You know, you're nothing like her. And I mean that in the best way. She held on. You reached out. That's different. I didn't know what to say to that. So I made us grilled cheese, and we watched a nature documentary about wolves, and I let the moments settle into the floor like warmth from a fireplace. High school came and went in what felt like a blink. Oliver joined the art club. He ran cross-country, badly, but with enthusiasm. He got a part-time job at a hardware store and came home smelling like sawdust and paint thinner. He applied to architecture programs and sweated over his portfolio for weeks, rearranging sketches, rebuilding models, agonizing over which drawings showed range and which ones were too safe. I helped where I could, which mostly meant staying out of the way and keeping the coffee pot full at midnight. When the acceptance letter came from a state university with a partial scholarship, I screamed. Oliver just stood there holding the envelope, looking stunned. Like he couldn't believe the world had actually said yes. We celebrated with pizza again. Same parking lot, same tradition. Biscuit was older now, slower, gray around the muzzle, but he still stole the pepperoni. The day I drove Oliver to college, I held it together longer than I thought I would. I helped him carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I made his bed because he would never do it himself. I met his roommate, a tall kid from Charlotte who seemed nice enough. I hung a small corkboard on the wall and pinned the photo of Diane in the center. Oliver watched me do it and said nothing, but when I turned around, his eyes were wet. I hugged him. I told him I was proud. I told him to call me on Sundays. I told him that Captain was welcome back any time. He laughed. Then he hugged me harder and said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For all of it." I cried the entire drive home. 2 hours and 40 minutes of ugly, gasping, ridiculous crying. I had to pull over twice. Biscuit sat in the passenger seat and looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Get it together, lady." The house was so quiet after he left. I noticed sounds I'd stopped hearing years ago: the fridge humming, the faucet dripping, the creak of the porch in the wind. I cooked for one again, and it felt wrong, like the portions were missing something even when the recipe was right. I filled the silence with work. I picked up extra shifts. I started volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. I repainted the bathroom. I told myself I was keeping busy, but the truth was simpler. I missed him. I missed the sound of pencils scratching on paper at 10 o'clock at night. I missed the arguments about loading the dishwasher. I missed someone needing me. Oliver called every Sunday, like I'd asked. He told me about his classes, his professors, a design competition he'd entered. He sounded alive in a way I'd never heard before, electric, purposeful. He was becoming the person he was meant to be, and I got to listen to it happen in weekly installments. 3 years passed. Oliver was 21 now, deep into his architecture program, interning at a small firm downtown, and sketching constantly. Every time he visited, he brought new drawings. Office buildings, community centers, a library he designed for a class project that won a regional award. His work was beautiful, clean lines with warmth, structures that felt like they were breathing. But I noticed something else during those visits. He kept looking at our house differently. Walking through rooms slowly, pausing in doorways, running his hand along the walls like he was measuring something in his head. He'd stand on the porch and stare at the yard, then scribble something in his notebook and tuck it away before I could see. I asked him once what he was drawing. "Just ideas," he said, and changed the subject. I didn't press it. I'd learned long ago that Oliver revealed things on his own schedule, and pushing only made him fold inward like a paper crane. Then came the phone call. It was a Sunday in March, but not our usual time. He called at 7 in the morning, which immediately made my stomach drop because Oliver never voluntarily woke up before 9. "Mom," he said. And his voice was strange. Tight. Nervous. Happy? I couldn't tell. "What's wrong?" I asked, already standing up from the couch. "Nothing's wrong. I need you to do something for me." "Okay. Don't come home next weekend." "What?" "I mean, don't come to the house, stay with Aunt Janine or something. Just, don't be home from Friday to Sunday." Aunt Janine was my coworker who Oliver had adopted as honorary family years ago. She lived 20 minutes away and had a guest room that smelled like lavender. "Oliver, what are you planning? Do you trust me?" he asked. That wasn't fair, and he knew it. "Of course I trust you," I said. "Then please, just give me the weekend." I agreed, mostly because I couldn't figure out how to say no to a question framed like that. I spent that weekend at Janine's, distracted, checking my phone every 10 minutes, imagining everything from a surprise birthday party, my birthday was 2 months away, to some kind of disaster involving power tools. He texted me on Sunday afternoon. "You can come home now." I drove back with my heart in my throat. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the porch. It wasn't creaking. The boards had been replaced, sanded smooth, stained a warm honey color that caught the late afternoon light. New railings. A small bench I'd never seen before, painted white, with a cushion that had tiny paw prints on it. I got out of the car slowly. The front door was new too. Solid wood, with a glass panel at the top and a handle that actually worked without jiggling. Beside the door, mounted to the wall, was a hand-painted sign. Small, rectangular, simple black letters on white wood. It said, "Sophie's Place." I stood there, not breathing. The door opened and Oliver stepped out. He was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt covered in paint. His hands were dusted with sawdust. Behind him, I could see the hallway, and it was different. The walls were a warm cream color, the light was softer. Something smelled like fresh wood and lemon polish. "Before you say anything," he said, holding up his hands. "Come inside." I followed him through the door and stopped. The living room had been transformed. Not demolished, not gutted, just reimagined. The old carpet was gone, replaced with reclaimed hardwood. The walls had been repainted in warm tones, soft ivory, a muted sage accent wall behind the bookshelf. New shelving lined one side of the room, built from what looked like hand-planed oak, each shelf slightly different in width, filled with books, framed photos, and small potted plants. The kitchen was where I lost it. He had rebuilt the cabinets. The old laminate ones that I'd been meaning to fix for a decade were gone, replaced with open shelving and solid wood frames. A new countertop, butcher block, ran along the back wall. The stove was the same, the one that ran hot on the left burner and clicked 3 times before igniting, but everything around it had been rebuilt to make it feel intentional, like the stove was the heart and the kitchen had grown around it. On the counter was a small ceramic jar. Inside it, a set of hand-carved wooden cooking utensils. I picked one up. It was smooth, perfectly shaped, clearly made by hand. I turned it over, and on the handle, in tiny letters, Oliver had carved, "For Mom." I set it down because my hands were shaking. Oliver stood in the doorway, watching me, his arms crossed, his expression caught somewhere between pride and terror. "You always said you wanted the house to feel like a home," he said. "Not just a place. You said that once, when I was like 9, and I never forgot it. You said, a home should feel like someone meant for you to be there." I remembered saying that. I'd said it while scrubbing crayon off the wall, frustrated after a long day. I didn't think he'd been listening. "I designed everything myself," he continued, speaking faster now, the way he did when he was nervous. "The shelves, the porch, the cabinets. I built most of it with Marcus. Remember Marcus? He's a contractor now. We've been working on it for 3 months. Every weekend you thought I was studying, I was here." Jeanine gave me the spare key. She said if I scratched her floors, she'd end me, but I think she was joking. I couldn't talk. I walked through the house, touching things. The new bathroom tile. The repainted bedroom, my bedroom, now a soft blue with white trim and a window seat he'd built into the alcove, a reading nook with a cushion and a small lamp. Exactly the kind of corner I'd always imagined but never built. In Oliver's old room, now a small study, the walls were lined with his drawings. Not the architecture projects. The old ones. The coloring book pages from those first visits. The stick-figure dogs from my lunch notes, carefully flattened and framed. The drawing of the house with no door, the blue crayon sky pressed hard into the paper, and next to it, a new drawing. A house with a big front door, wide open, light spilling out. Underneath, in his handwriting, "Home has a door now." I sat down on the floor of that room and cried. Not quietly, not gracefully. I sat on the floor and sobbed like I hadn't in years, big, shaking, gasping sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't even know it existed. Oliver sat down beside me. He put his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, this boy who had once stood barefoot on wet grass holding a stuffed rabbit, this man who had just rebuilt my world with his own hands. "You gave me everything, Mom," he said quietly. "You gave up school, you gave up going out, you wore the same shoes for 4 years. You think I didn't notice, but I noticed all of it. Every single thing." I shook my head, trying to speak. "This isn't payback," he said, "it's not even close to enough. But I wanted you to have a place that feels like what you gave me. Something built on purpose, something that says, you belong here." I grabbed his hand and held it tight. "I already had that," I whispered. "I've had that since the day you walked through my door." He squeezed my hand back. "I know," he said. "But now you have the house to match." We sat there for a long time, not talking, just sitting in the house that he had rebuilt around me, in the life that we had built around each other. The months after that were the quietest kind of happy. I woke up every morning in a house that felt new but familiar, like putting on a coat that had been tailored to fit. I made coffee in the rebuilt kitchen and sat in the window seat with Biscuit, who was old and slow and mostly deaf by then, curled at my feet. The porch didn't creak, the door didn't stick. The light came through the windows the way Grace comes into a room, gently, and without asking permission. Oliver graduated the following spring. I sat in the 3rd row and clapped so hard my palms burned. He walked across the stage in a cap and gown, looked out into the crowd, found me, and pointed. Just pointed, like, there you are, that's my person. He got a job at a small firm specializing in affordable housing. His first project was a community center in a low-income neighborhood on the south side of Asheville. He designed it with wide hallways, natural light, a kitchen where cooking classes could be held, and a reading corner for kids tucked into a sunny alcove by the window. When I visited the building for the first time, I recognized every detail: the open shelving, the warm wood, the intentional imperfection, the feeling that someone had meant for you to be there. He had built me into everything he made. I didn't say it out loud, I didn't need to. He saw me looking and smiled, and that was enough. People sometimes ask me why I did it. Why I took in a stranger's child. Why I gave up the things I gave up. They frame it like a sacrifice, like I lost something, but I didn't lose anything. I found the thing I didn't know I was missing. I found purpose in packed lunches and drawn-on napkins and Sunday phone calls. I found joy in burned rice and borrowed jackets and a stuffed rabbit named Captain who still sits on a shelf in the study, threadbare, lopsided, irreplaceable. I used to think family was something that happened to you. A set of names you inherited, a table you were assigned to at birth. But it's not. Family is a choice you make every morning when you get up and decide to show up for someone. It's every meal you cook, every note you write, every time you sit outside a closed door and say, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Oliver taught me that. Or maybe we taught each other. A woman who didn't know how to be a mother and a boy who had forgotten how to trust. We stumbled through it together, imperfectly, stubbornly, with burned dinners and bad drawings and a little dog who stole pepperoni. And somehow, out of all that ordinary mess, we built something extraordinary. Not because it was big. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was real, and it was ours, and neither of us ever let go. If you're standing at the edge of something terrifying right now, if life has handed you a moment you didn't ask for, and you're wondering whether you're strong enough, brave enough, ready enough, let me tell you what I've learned. You're not ready. You won't be, nobody ever is. But show up anyway. Open the door, reach out your hand. You might be surprised at what reaches back.